Did you know that there was a motorway proposed for the east of London that didn't get built? Well, that comes as no surprise. Or did it? You see, this motorway would have formed the eastern part of Ringway 2, starting at Woodford with the M11, running southwards down past Redbridge, Ilford past Barking and into Thamesmead. Hold up just a second. Did you see it? A very similar route runs along the same alignment. It's the A406 North Circular Road. So how did we get here? Well, to find out, we need to look at the original proposal, aka the M15. This new road was proposed long before the ringways, and just so happened to be incorporated upon the conception of the ringways in 1961. In 1910, this road was proposed by the London Traffic Division Board of Trade, along with a bunch of other schemes, which was intended to run along the border between the urban and suburban parts of London, and was originally intended as an unemployment relief scheme following World War I, as to allow access to industrial areas and thus would allow access to growing industry. Let's look at the route then. At the northernmost point is where we would have had the M15 at a free-flowing junction with the M11 and the then proposed M12 at the Woodford interchange, similar to the current setup of what we have today. At Redbridge roundabout is where the motorway crosses the A12, and this would have been a similar arrangement to what we have today. The only difference being is that the A12 would have been carried on a flyover or underpass, possibly explaining the size of the roundabout. Slightly after this junction, the motorway would have had a width of a total of 6 lanes, 3 in each direction, instead of the current 4. 2 in each direction, and then after this the motorway would have been widened to a total of 8 lanes, or 4 in each direction. Then a local access junction at Ilford with an overkill of a junction with the A118 at an elevated roundabout with the M15 or Ringway 2 passing over the top and the A118 passing underneath. Perhaps a bit like this. Then after this, another local junction at Barking with a similar, if not the exact same layout as the one that exists today. Going a bit south, intersecting with the A13, is where we would have had a junction, obviously. However, here's the interesting bit, or not, depending on how you look at it. The designs are actually unknown, but we can make assumptions by looking at how much land the possible layouts would have taken up by using a bit of our imagination. 1. A 3-level stacked roundabout similar to the Wisley interchange with the M25. 2. Knowing how utterly crazy these plans were, it also could have been a stacked interchange, similar to what is found with the M25 and the M23, the M4 and M5 at Almondsbury interchange, as one of the plans included upgrading the A13 to a possible motorway, making it the M13, as the A13 was planned at the time to have a relief road built. Option 3. Another option for the junction's design could have been a free-flowing junction similar to the planned layout of the somewhat M50 extension known as the Strensham to Solihull motorway, which was proposed to have a loop connecting the M5 to the M50 and vice versa. These are all just ideas though of what they could look like, but knowing the scale of the scheme, it was likely the more overkill and over-engineered option, possibly explaining why no actual designers turned up and for now remains a mystery. After the mysterious junction with the A13, the motorway was set to cross the River Thames. Now, both a bridge and a tunnel were considered. However, despite the lower cost of a bridge, a tunnel was found to be the most favourable option, as it could be built within a lower timescale to allow the development on the south bank. This so-called development eventually became known as the infamously named
Thamesmead. There would have been a tunnel crossing with a motorway beneath the Thames at Tripcock-Ness, but that never happened.
A toll was considered by the Greater London Council to cover the extra cost, but this was quickly forgotten about. The tunnel would have been constructed in a similar manner to the A55 Conwy Tunnel in North Wales. And speaking of Thamesmead, immediately after the tunnel would have been the Thamesmead interchange with the A2016 Thamesmead Spine Road, and the layout would have been like this. The layout was planned out like this to allow a tidal flow system at peak times with variable message signs to direct traffic, much like the Dartford crossing. After going through Thamesmead, the road was planned to run slightly to the west of Church Manor Way and Camrose Street. This section in particular would have required demolition of rows upon rows of homes in the way of the new motorway. Next, we have where the road would have crossed Woolwich Old Cemetery. Now, originally the road would have gone right over the top of it, but in 1968 it was changed to quite a short cut and cover tunnel. After the tunnel, the motorway would have curved slightly to the east before the last local junction meeting the A207 at a standard double bridge roundabout, with the motorway of course running underneath. Immediately after the junction with the A207, the motorway would have passed through some ancient woodland and reaching the A2/A2M at the Falconwood interchange and the southern section of Ringway 2. And as the junction with the A207 and the A2/A2M were pretty close together, the southbound carriageway and slip road were to be a braided slip road arrangement. As this scheme required less demolition, it was the least controversial out of the rest of the Ringway scheme. That's why, long after the Great Cancellation in 1973, the road was still being pursued and looked at by the Ministry of Transport, more specifically the section between Woodford and Beckton, and had a designated number unlike the rest of the Ringway scheme, and thus has survived being cancelled, and it was eventually built as an extension of the A406 North Circular Road in 1989. When an edition of the M11 opened in April of 1977, it briefly had a connection with Redbridge Roundabout, and thus was under motorway regulations. This short link opened as a dual 3-lane motorway with hard shoulders in preparation for the M15 to be constructed, but this of course didn't happen. Well, not as a motorway at least. And when the A406 opened in the late 80s, motorway status was revoked. And today, where the hard shoulders formerly were, is now just an extra lane. However, the SOS phones still remain, well, at least at the end of the slip road at Redbridge Roundabout. Crossing the River Thames. After the collapse of any hope of building a motorway tunnel into Thamesmead, a river crossing was still being put forward constantly, and this included the extension of the North Circular Road from Beckton to the A2, just like the M15 would have. But this again was rejected, as it was going to run through the ancient woodland at Oxleys. But this again was revived under Ken Livingstone, who ironically was the former leader of the GLC. His version was rebranded as the Thames Gateway Bridge, and the only difference was that the bit running through the woodland and to the A2 was removed from the plan altogether. This version was planned to carry buses and space for a potential tram extension at a later date, but this too was rejected. In 2012, TfL was considering of moving the Woolwich ferry upstream to Galleon's Reach, but this was quickly forgotten about. Lastly, in 2014, TfL wanted to build a new crossing called the Galleon's Reach, but we all know what happened to that. The cost of the original scheme. In 1970, the original M15 motorway scheme would have cost around about £106 million, which in 2024 prices comes up to about a whopping £1.4 billion. Ridiculous, I know. While that's not a bad price to pay per mile, it all comes down to the cost of the environment and the local impact it would have had, and we all know how that turned out. At least unlike the rest of the Ringway scheme, something actually got built in the end, and is better than nothing. Or is it worse? Thanks for watching, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and if you haven't already, check out the one I made on the M14, and I'll see you in another intriguing episode of Unbuilt Motorways.